Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Keith R.A. DeCandido, and he is he is a writer of speculative fiction, and I'm going to say that he has written over 50 books, and they are of all different in all different. Um I guess, universes. And I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about what it is that you actually write.
Words mostly. Um, I've uh, I've written both extensively, both in licensed fiction and in my own original fiction. Um, I've written in 30, more than 30 different licensed universes. Most prolifically in Star Trek, I wrote a whole mess of Star Trek novels, short stories, and comic books between 1999 and 2010, with other bits and pieces here and there since. Um, I've also written for TV shows like Supernatural, Doctor Who, Andromeda, Farscape, Orphan Black, movies, Serenity, Cars, Alien, um, uh, Resident Evil, and stuff based on games like Dungeons and Dragons, World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Command and Conquer, and books based on comic books. I've written prose adventures of Spider-Man, Thor, the X-Men, the Hulk, Silver Surfer, and so yeah, I've done a lot of different licensed universes. Um, most recently, I did an alien novel called Alien Isolation, and I've also written my own in my own universes of my own creation. There's the Precinct series, which is a series of high fantasy police procedurals, kind of Law and Order meets Lord of the Rings. One reviewer called it Dungeons and Dragnet, and it takes place in your classic epic fantasy setting with humans and elves and dwarves and magic and wizards and stuff. But the main characters are detectives who solve crimes. So it's basically mixing, mystery chocolate with fantasy peanut butter. And I've also got an urban fantasy series of novels called The Adventures of Brom Gold, which is about a guy from the Bronx, New York, which is where I'm from, who hunts monsters for a living. The first book was called A Furnace Sealed and came out in 2019. I am, even as we speak, working on the second. Well, not even as we speak. Even as we speak, I'm talking to you. But right now, I am working on book 2, which is called Feet of Clay. Feet spelled F-E-A-T. And I'm hoping to have that out in 2021 from Wordfire Press. I was originally hoping to have it out in 2020, but then 2020 happened. But I'm plugging away at it anyway. I've also written a cycle of urban fantasy short stories set in Key West, Florida, called Tales of Cassie Zukov, Weirdness Magnet. Those have appeared in a bunch of different anthologies and such, as well as one collection called Ragnarok and Roll. And I'm almost have enough stories for a second collection, which will be called Ragnarok in a Hard Place. And I've also written a novel and a bunch of novellas and short stories in a world, a city. They're about cops in a city filled with superheroes. It's called the Super City Cops, or Super City Police Department. So they're superhero stories, but they're not actually about the superheroes. It's about what the police have to deal with when there are superheroes around, and other stuff too. So I also write pop culture commentary for a number of different sources, primarily for Tor.com. Where I write about Star Trek and superhero movie adaptations and other various pop culture phenomena for them. And I also have a Patreon where I write TV and movie reviews and vignettes featuring my original characters. And I also post things like excerpts from my work in progress and also cat pictures. I think, and I've written nonfiction for other sources too. I write essays and think pieces and stuff for various anthologies and the occasional website. So, that's my writing career, more or less.
Okay, I'm kind of curious. How did you get your start?
As a writer, or in the business generally?
Well, in the business generally.
That was easy. I got started working as an editor, actually. When I was writing, the closest I came to being it's actually even more complicated than that. When I graduated college, me and some friends put together a talk show on public access here in New York City called The Chronic Rift. It ran from 1990 to 1994. We did news, reviews, and panel discussions, as well as occasional interviews. And for those panel discussions, we had lots of really cool people on. We tried to get a good mix of both fans and professionals. I got to meet a lot of people in the science fiction field through The Chronic Rift initially. And then in 1993, I'd already been working as an editor for Library Journal magazine and for Neil Schumann Publishers. And I was out of work in 93, and John Betancourt, who had been on the show, was looking for a new assistant to work for the late Byron Price, who was a book packager. And I interviewed with Byron. He thought I'd be a good fit for the job, and I took the job, and I actually worked there for 5 years on staff, first as an associate editor and then as a full editor. Did a lot of work on a lot of different projects there, working with some wonderful people. And that also gave me the opportunity to write some fiction, both stuff I did internally within the company, including my first short story sale, which was actually for one of the anthologies that John and I were putting together. And then also, I was buying fiction from people who were also editing anthologies, and from them I found out about other things going on, and so was able to submit things and pitch things, and it just sort of snowballed from there.
So that's how you actually started writing.
Yeah, well, what happened, the first short story sale is great. I love telling this story because it's a completely non-replicable way of breaking in as a writer. So the big project I did when I worked for Byron was a series of novels and short story anthologies based on Marvel superheroes. This ran from 1994 until 2000. We did a whole bunch of Spider-Man novels, X-Men novels, Avengers novels, Captain America novels, Iron Man novels, and so on, Hulk novels. And the first two projects we did to launch the series was a Spider-Man novel by Diane Duane and a Spider-Man anthology. And we were putting together the Spider-Man anthology, and we had stories for all of Spidey's major villains except for Venom. Venom was Spider-Man's most popular villain at the time, and it wasn't for lack of trying. We had sent like 6 different proposals into Marvel, and they rejected all of them. We're past the 11th hour at this point, and John and I say, look, what do you want to see in a Venom story? And the guys at Marvel sent us a sentence. It was too late for us to assign it to anybody. We basically decided to do it ourselves. So I wrote a draft of the story, gave it to John. John tore it apart, rewrote it from the ground up, gave it back to me. I tore it apart, rewrote it from the ground up, gave it back to him. And 3 days later, we had my first short story, which was a collaboration with John. There are parts of that story that I know I wrote. I wrote all the fight scenes, for example. There are parts of that story that I know John wrote. There are parts of that story I haven't the first freaking clue who wrote it. It's possible that like I wrote the nouns and he wrote the verbs. I don't know. It was just that week was such a blur, but we got a story out of it, and that's how I became a fiction writer. It was like I said, a completely non-replicable way of doing this. I wrote some more stories for the Marvel anthologies as well. My first novel was actually part of that line as well. It was a Spider-Man novel called Venom's Wrath that I wrote with Jose Nieto, which came about because Byron was too cheap to give me a raise, but he gave me a novel contract instead. So yeah, whatever. It meant I didn't feel guilty about working on the novel on company time, certainly. And like I said, other opportunities presented themselves. I found out about a Magic the Gathering anthology and submitted a story to that. I had been talking this was when Wizards of the Coast was just starting up, and I had been in touch with them about possibly hiring some of their artists to work on our project. That never actually materialized, but I knew about the stuff that was going on anyway and got to submit. I got to write a Doctor Who short story because it was co-edited by Andrew Lane, who had written a bunch of stories for me for some of the anthologies that we were doing. And it just, like I said, it snowballed from there. Each project led to the possibility of another project. By 1998, I was doing well enough and had enough projects going that I felt I could go freelance. So I quit working full-time for Byron, still worked for him on a freelance basis for about a year after that. And I was completely freelance from that point forward. Since 1998, the only salaried job I've had were some work for the U.S. Census Bureau in 2009 and 2010, which was great fun, actually. I'm really glad I did that. And I honestly would have done it in 2020 except I didn't have time. My schedule was just too busy to fit it in. and given how crazy the census wound up being this year, I'm both grateful, glad I didn't, and sorry I didn't, because it was, my wife did work for the census last year. So who knows, in 2030 maybe we both will. But that, and then for a brief period from late 2011 or late 2010 to early 2012, I took on a part-time job working for a school library just because I needed extra money. Not that it was a lot of money, but that was during a period when things were particularly bad. But other than those two, everything I've done has been freelance. It's all been income that it comes with a 1099 rather than a W-2, and it's worked out okay for me. Not always great. It's a feast or famine existence that can be very fraught sometimes, but I've managed, and hopefully, knock on wood, I will continue to manage.
That's great. So what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
Which kinds of books?
All of the speculative fiction kind of book.
Oh, I mean, obviously, science fiction is and fantasy are pretty popular, given that they've over the course of my lifetime, it's gone from a minor niche in publishing with occasional goofy forays onto the big screen into arguably the most popular subgenre on the planet now, in all forms of media. So obviously there's something appealing there. I think part of it is just the appeal generally of science fiction and fantasy is that it gives you an opportunity to view the world we're in now through a world that we're not in. The main thing the thing that makes science fiction and fantasy stand out from pretty much every other subgenre, most genres are genres of plot, romance, mystery, thriller, horror, what have you. Science fiction and fantasy are genres of setting, which means you're free to do whatever kind of plot you want, which is very liberating and makes the genre incredibly flexible. And I think it's one of the reasons why, it's hard to even say there's no such thing as like a standard science fiction story anymore, because as the genre has grown and matured and branched out, there's just no limit as to what kinds of stories you can tell, because the only thing that requires it to be science fiction and fantasy is something different from the world we're in, whether it's moving forward 300 years in time or walking through a wardrobe to another world, or it's Seattle but there are vampires, whatever. It opens up so many possibilities and so many different modes of storytelling, and that's very appealing, and both to a wide audience and to a small audience, if that's all you want or are going for. It also helps that and you've seen this both in TV and movies as well as books. For a long time, the only way you could get your book published so that an audience of any number would see it is through one of the major publishers. And if you wanted to produce a TV show, the only way to do it was to sell it to one of 3 networks, or by 1986, 4 networks. And over the last 30 years or so, that has slowly changed to the point where there are literally hundreds of places you can sell your TV show. There are more options than just the local Cineplex to make your movie, and there's a lot more options to publish your book than just the New York publishers. They're still there, they're still thriving, but that's not your only option. And that opens up a lot more possibilities as well. And has made it a much better atmosphere for writers in general. And that it expands the genre and makes it more popular and more appealing.
Wow, wonderful answer. That's great. So I'd like you to choose one of your latest books that is in your own universe. Okay. And let me know what was the inspiration for that book.
Oh, that's easy. I can. I actually mentioned it in passing before. Both the book and the inspiration. The Brom Gold series, the urban fantasy that takes place in the Bronx. That was very specifically inspired by working for the U.S. Census Bureau in 2009 and 2010. I have lived in the Bronx for 80% of my life. And and the other 20% was mostly either in New York or in places in New Jersey that are very close to New York. And but the Bronx has always been my home. I was born here. I was raised here. I was educated here. I graduated from Cardinal Spellman High School in the Bronx, which is also, by the way, where Justice Sonia Sotomayor on the Supreme Court. That's where she graduated high school also. And my high school has not grown tired of promoting this fact, and not that they should. That's a very nice feather in their cap. And I graduated college from Fordham University here in the Bronx. Go Rams! And I've lived, like I said, I've lived here most of my life. My work for the census also took me all over the Bronx. I was working for, specifically because the Bronx is its own county, so we had our own, all of the census work in the office in which I was working was specifically located in the Bronx. And I got to go all over the place. I got to see all sorts of different parts of the Bronx that I'd never seen before. And it brought to the front of my mind something that had always been in the back of my mind, which is that when people write about New York, they're almost always writing about Manhattan south of 125th Street. Maybe if they want to get a little edgy, they'll do Brooklyn. And that's about as far as it goes. Queens, Staten Island, the Bronx, Upper Manhattan are almost never even acknowledged or considered as part of New York. And there's a lot here that isn't in Manhattan. The New York City is not just that one island. And so I basically wanted to do something that would focus specifically on the Bronx. And so I started up a Furnace Sealed in 2011. And it didn't actually get published until 2019, but that's, life, the universe, and publishing. And what I specifically want to do was bring in different locales, show how complex and diverse and interesting a place the Bronx is, and work in some of the history as well. There's a lot of really fascinating history that took place here from the early colonial days all the way through to modern times. So that was the inspiration for that series in general and that book in particular. The second book, it has less of the historical stuff, but a lot more of the different neighborhood stuff. There are two plots, one of which focuses on a neighborhood that used to have a very high Korean population, but doesn't anymore. It still has some, but and what those changes mean through a fantasy lens in this case. And the other one involves the community of Riverdale, which has a very high Jewish population, and involves the reanimation of a golem that was already been animated once before and actually killed the main character's parents, so it's got a personal stake for him.
Aha. So what were the steps that you took to bring it from general inspiration to a finished product?
I plotted out the book. I wanted to work in bits of history, and I did a lot of research into, and basically reading the research inspired some of the plot ideas, and then I just worked through it and figured out the best way for it to work. In particular, the history of some of the local indigenous peoples who lived here before the Dutch showed up, and their religious traditions as well. Since I worked with some of the myths and the gods of what we generally refer to as the Wappingers. They've gone through they have a bunch of different names, but so that was part of it, and just looking at the different communities and their own. The idea is that a lot of that monsters are real, gods are real, different creatures, supernatural creatures do exist, and I've been trying very hard to stick with the various mythologies and traditions and cultural touchstones of the various people who live in the Bronx. One of the characters, one of the supporting characters in A Furnace Sealed is actually a West African god, one of the Yoruba gods, and like I said, it plays on the history of the Wappingers and the history of the different people who lived in the colonies of what eventually became the Bronx.
Okay. Yeah, that actually answered my next question what kind of research went into writing the book?
I owe a huge debt of gratitude to a gentleman named Lloyd Alton and various collaborators he's worked with over the years. He works for the Bronx Historical Society and has published a whole bunch of wonderful books. The Bronx Historical Society was a tremendous resource in creating these books, and hopefully will continue to be.
So what was your favorite research story, even just of all of your books?
That's easy, because it was such a completely different experience from anything I'd ever done. So in 2008, I had a CSI New York novel published. It was called Four Walls. And the plot I hit on, and this was partly because I knew somebody who worked for a medium security prison, and I thought it would be interesting to do, have one of the two cases that ran through the novel involve a prison. And I specifically wanted to do a medium security prison because nobody ever writes about those. It's always either a minimum security prison, which is, country club for white collar criminals, or a maximum security prison where they put, the people on death row and the hardcore criminals. But that's actually not the majority of prisons. The majority of them are medium security for people who commit minor felonies, misdemeanors, comparatively harmless crimes, at least compared to murder, and but also not white collar crime either. So there's a prison, the Arthur Kill Penitentiary in Staten Island, and I had a friend who worked as a corrections officer there, and he put me in touch with the right people in Albany to talk to, and I arranged for a tour, which was phenomenal. It was just great to the people in charge took me around, showed me, I explained. The best way to do research if you're a writer is to go to somebody who is either a professional in the field or an expert in the field. Say, hi, I'm a writer. I'm writing a book about this thing that you love and or do for a living and want to make sure I get it right. Can you help me? They will almost always say yes, because they have all seen in a book or a TV show or a movie the thing they love or the thing they work in being gotten completely wrong. And that's what happened here. I had to go through some paperwork hoops through the State Department of Corrections, but it went pretty smoothly. And then we arranged the tour, and they took me around. I learned all sorts of amazing stuff that was just fantastic. My favorite thing that I learned, which was something that had nothing to do with the tour, was just a comment that he made, but it added a nice touch to the book when I wrote it. Before you even walk in the door, any electronic devices or weapons have to be checked. And I just offhandedly said, so if a cop comes to the prison, they have to check their weapon, because I would need to know that for the book. And the guy giving the tour said, yes, and they bitch about it every single time. Every cop who comes through there tries to get us saying, no, I don't have to check my weapon, right? Every time. So I worked that into the story, And I've had people who work as COs read the book and say, wow, you really got it right. I'm impressed, because I don't, most people don't. Most people get their ideas of what prison life is like from television, which is rarely accurate.
So what was the biggest challenge in writing and putting out that book?
That particular book? Actually, I have written, as I said, in over 30 different licensed universes, and writing for the CSI franchise was literally the only time where all the proper names in the book were run through the legal department, and about 70% of them had to be changed for reasons that were never made clear to me. They didn't, for some reason, a lot of the names that I chose, they thought, no, for legal reasons, we can't use that. And I, to this day, do not understand why. And it was frustrating, just because I'm very particular about the names I choose for my characters. In particular, trying to represent particular ethnicities. At the very least, they kept that. Like, if it was an Italian name, they gave me a different Italian name as a suggestion, or if it was a Russian name, they gave me a different Russian name. So I was able to do that at least. But it was frustrating to have to jump through that particular hoop, because God knows there's enough hoops to jump through when you're doing tie-in fiction anyway. Aside from that, it was fine. I mean, the approvals process was pretty smooth. And my editor, Jennifer Heddle was great to work with. I'd already worked with her on the Serenity novelization. She's now the person over at, well, now at Disney technically, but in the Lucasfilm division of Disney. She's in charge of story development stuff for them now. And she was great to work with. And yeah, that was the only weird thing. And from what I understand from the other people who wrote CSI books, they always insisted on that. And nobody understands it to this day.
So, what character did you love or hate the most when you're writing?
Oh God, I couldn't narrow it down. I've written so many characters over the years. I mean, my two favorite Star Trek characters are Worf and Kira. So it was actually kind of cool that my first two Star Trek novels, the first one focused on Worf, you can see the painting back there, and that was for the Diplomatic Implausibility, which was my first Star Trek novel, which focused on Worf's first mission as a Federation ambassador. And then my second Star Trek novel was a Deep Space Nine novel called Demons of Air and Darkness, which had a very heavy focus on Kira. So getting to write my two favorite Star Trek characters in my first two Star Trek novels was a huge thrill. And I've loved every opportunity I've had to write those two. And I've actually, I've gotten to write them on several other occasions as well. So definitely them. I'm writing my first short story sale and my first novel sale were both Spider-Man. I have been a fan of Spider-Man since I was about 6. You may remember a kid show called The Electric Company that ran in the 1970s. That was my introduction to Spider-Man in particular and superheroes in general. The Electric Company had the rights to do little stories, sketches with Spider-Man. And they also published a comic book. Marvel published a tie-in comic book called Spidey Super Stories, which were specifically about the Electric Company version of Spider-Man, basically. And that made me into a Spider-Man fan. So, I still love writing the character. In fact, I wrote a Spider-Man novel in 2005 called Down These Mean Streets, which Titan is right now reprinting. It's just out right now in late spring, early summer of 2021. They just published an omnibus called Darkest Hours, which includes my Down These Mean Streets, Drowned in Thunder, which is by Christopher Bennett, and the title story, The Darkest Hours, which is written by some obscure unknown writer named Jim Butcher. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes, I've heard of it.
But no, Jim, it will surprise nobody who's read the Dresden Files that Jim is a huge Spider-Man fan. Because there's a lot of Peter Parker and Harry Dresden. And when Simon & Schuster got the rights, the aforementioned Jennifer Heddle was one of the editors in charge of it. And Jen was the one who bought Jim's Dresden Files books for Rock Books back in the day. And she went to Jim and said, "Hey, Jim, want to write a Spider-Man novel?" And he said, yeah. And so he wrote that. My novel, Down These Mean Streets, was actually one of the first books they did in that particular line that Simon & Schuster did from 2005 to 2007. And then Christopher's also was in there. And they all take place at around the same time in Spider-Man's continuity, so they go actually very nicely together. And that just got reprinted, which I'm very happy about. I mean, I don't get any money for it, but I'm glad to see that it's getting a chance to find a new audience.
Great. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, I just had 2 novels published recently, both collaborations, which are not in my own universes in either case. There was one that came out last fall called To Hell and Regroup, which is the 3rd book in the 18th Race trilogy of military science fiction novels by David Sherman. David wrote the first 2, and I was actually the editor, because I still, even though I stopped working full-time as an editor back in the late 90s, I still do a lot of freelance editing. And I edited Issue in Doubt and In All Directions, which were the first 2 books in David's trilogy. For various and sundry health reasons, he was unable to finish book 3. And since I edited the first 2, he asked me to basically take the baton from him and finish the book. And so with his guidance and his assistance, I finished the book based on his initial draft and notes and such. It's very much a collaboration, but it's still really it's his book. I just put it to bed for him. But I'm also it was a great experience for me because I had to basically write it in his style. And it was a level. I've written science fiction with military personnel in it before. This is the first time I've written military science fiction, and it was very enjoyable and eye-opening and interesting for me. And then just at the beginning of 2021, I had my first thriller out, which is called Animal, which I wrote with Dr. Manish K. Batra, which is about a serial killer who targets people who harm animals. It's kind of like Dexter if PETA had created it. That was a very enjoyable book to do, and also a very terrible book to do at the same time. We were talking about research before. If the CSI book was some of my favorite research, Animal was probably my least favorite, because the number of ways in which animals are still harmed regularly by people for no particularly good reason is appalling. I'm not talking about like for food purposes. I'm just talking about the rampant abuses of animals for trinkets and for, like the hands of gorillas being used for ashtrays and various uses that elephant's ivory is put toward, and people who hunt big game not because they need to but because they want to, and just the treatment of a lot of fish by commercial fishers, all of it, it's disheartening to say the least. Anyway, that's out now from Wordfire Press. What's coming is the next Bromgold book, as I mentioned, Feet of Clay. I've got a bunch of short stories out that are either out or about to come out in various anthologies. After I'm done with Feet of Clay, I'm going to be writing Phoenix Precinct, which is the next book in the Fantasy Police Procedural series. And I also have another project that I can't talk about yet. So it is a tie-in project, but I signed a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't say what it is. It is a universe I have worked in before, I can say that much. That doesn't really narrow it down because I've worked in 35 of them, but
right.
It's a fun project. It's a 3-part project, and I have written the outlines for the first 2 parts, and I have to write the outline for the 3rd part. And once it's all approved, then I will go ahead and write the thing. So I'm hoping to get approval on that pretty quickly. That's something that actually I'm hoping will still be out this year. And there may be some other stuff too, but that's the next big things are. Oh, geez, I forgot. I can't believe I forgot this. There's a series of novellas about cryptids called Systema Paradoxa, which is being published by eSpec Books. These are all novellas about different, creatures, the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Loch Ness Monster, that kind of thing. I have one out called All the Way House, which is about the Jersey Devil. And it is the secret origin of the Jersey Devil. A bunch of other cryptids are involved as well. And it takes place in 3 different time periods, both in 2020, in 1909, and in the 1730s. And I'm very proud of that. I don't think it's available yet, but you can pre-order it, and it should be out any day now from eSpec. So the official pub date is June. So depending on when this video goes live, it may be available by the time it does. And that's out now. And that's the 4th book in the series. There's a whole bunch of them, and they have beautiful covers, and they're really nifty little stories about various creatures.
The video should actually be going live today. So.
Oh, okay. Well, yes.
That'd be great. Yeah. I do have a couple of other little questions for you.
Sure.
I noticed, I've been doing a little research about you, and I noticed that you do readings of your books.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little
my short stories.
Your short stories. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
That's something I started during the recent apocalypse.
Right.
Last March and April, people were stuck at home, and my wife and I hit on the idea of recording me doing readings on YouTube just to give people some additional forms of entertainment while they were stuck at home. And I've got over 200 subscribers now, and probably more people who watch it who aren't subscribed. So it's been a great way to promote my work. I love reading my work. It's one of my favorite things to do at conventions is to do readings. And so it was great fun to do that. I actually blew through my entire short story oeuvre, as well as a bunch of novellas and novelettes. And then that got me through to the end of 2020. For 2021, what I've been specifically doing is one from 2000 until 2007. We did a series called the Starfleet Corps of Engineers, which were novella-length stories that were published as ebooks. And this was Simon & Schuster was very early on the ebook bandwagon, and they were already doing original ebooks back in 2000, even before the Kindle came out. And we did a monthly series, again, called the Starfleet Corps of Engineers. And the SCE stories were the only things I didn't read in 2020. And what I've been doing for 2021, which I started in January, is doing weekly readings of those novellas, which I've been doing in installments. So it's a novella per month, basically. So each individual part is anywhere between 15 minutes and half an hour or so. And so every Tuesday, it's on Trek Tuesday, I release a new part from one of my SCE novellas. And then once I get to the end of those, which will be in October sometime, I'm probably going to discontinue the channel just because it's specifically called Crad COVID Readings, and I'm hoping that will be an outdated name for it by then. And even so, I'll have pretty much covered everything at that point. There may be one or two more short stories or stuff that I'll have written since then that I may throw in just to make it complete. But I don't. We'll see. I mean, like I said, I'm hoping that its usefulness as a form of entertainment during a pandemic lockdown will be redundant by then.
Can you explain what CRAD means?
It's my initials.
Okay.
KRAD. Yeah, Keith R.A. DeCandido.
So why do you use the RA? Just
partly so you can make the acronym CRAD out of it. I when I was a little kid, I thought like real writers use their initials. That's the thing writers did because I was 8. But I sort of got in the habit of anytime I wrote something, having the byline be Keith R.A. DeCandido, all the way into my, that including when I was writing for my high school newspaper, and it just sort of stuck. And there's a long and proud history of people with 2 initials, especially with the initials R.A. There's me, there's R.A. Lafferty, there's R.A. Salvatore, there's R.A. Jones, there's Kurt R.A. Giambastiani, we're everywhere. So I'm just, part of that club. But, and it does provide a convenient set of initials that people can use. There are several fandoms in which I have written where I am referred to as CRAD, partly because it means they don't have to figure out how to spell Keith or pronounce DeCandido, which makes everybody happy. So I'm perfectly happy to be known as CRAD.
Okay, great. And the other question I had is, I noticed that you have a lot of audiobooks out. Do you read your own audiobooks or do you have someone else read them?
No, I don't even have control over that. Okay. Well, I to some extent I do. I did with A Furnace Sealed. I love to read my own fiction, but I do not have the electronic equipment or a location in which I can do a professional recording. Okay. For that reason, I have not yet done any of my own audios. That may change someday. But while I enjoy reading, I'm not really good enough, and again, do not have the equipment enough to do it on a professional basis. Having said that, I'm very happy with a lot of the readings I've gotten. T. Morris did a wonderful job with my Super City Police Department novel, The Case of the Claw. Lisa Renee Pitts read one of my V-Wars short stories phenomenally well. But my absolute favorite is T.J. Clark. T.J. Clark read A Furnace Sealed, and I really hope he's available to do Feet of Clay. The Brom Gold books are first-person narration, and T.J. he is exactly what Brom sounds like in my head. Like, Wordfire Press sent me 2 audition tapes, and one of them wasn't like, it was a New York accent, but it was the wrong New York accent. He like, and then I heard TJ's, and it's like, oh my God, that's Brom. And he nailed all the other. There's a lot of different voices and a lot of different accents in A Furnace Sealed, and he absolutely nailed every single one. I was really impressed. For that matter, oh God, I can't remember her name. It's a voiceover actor, woman who did an audio. There was my Spider-Man novel, Down These Mean Streets, the one that the Titans reprinting. There was also an audio release of that, and she did a tremendous job. Overall, I've generally been really happy with the audios that people have done. Again, I've rarely had input. Certainly none of the tie-in stuff. That's out of my control anyway. Mm-hmm. And for the original stuff, some of it was in my control, some of it wasn't. So okay. I got paid either way, so you know.
Right. Okay, now I've got some questions for you on being a writer.
Okay.
What's your favorite part about being a writer and on the whole writing and publishing process?
Well, it's certainly not the glamour. I like. Part of it is just I like making stories. I've always liked making stories, and the fact that I get to do it in a manner that allows me to make a living doing it is a huge privilege, and a huge thrill. There's still, way back in 1996, I got copies in the mail of an anthology called Otherwhere, and that was the first book that had my name on the cover as, well, the editor really, but you know, my name as the byline. It was me and Laura Ann Gilman. We collaborated on that anthology together, so we were listed on the cover and on the spine as the editors of the book. So that was really the first book with my name on the cover. And that was an absolute thrill. It's like, this is a book with my name right there on it. It's like, it's listed as being by me. That thrill has not abated. It's been 25 years. And I had the same thrill when I got the copies of All the Way House, the Jersey Devil novella, in the mail as well. It's like, look, it's a book with my name on it. I'm like showing it to people. It's like, look, it's a real book. It's that, as somebody who my parents were well, they're retired, but my parents are librarians. I was raised with books. I was raised with stories. My parents read to me when I was a kid, and I started reading, you know, on my own pretty quickly. I've always loved stories and books, and so having there be that many books that I did. And not just that, even like, you know, when a post goes live on Tor.com that I wrote, and especially, you know, now you can get almost instant gratification because people will write reviews on Amazon or make comments on your blog posts or whatever, and knowing that, you know, you're having that effect on people and the people are reading my words is a wonderful thrill. And sure, I mean, there are negative comments too. My absolute favorite Amazon review to this day is the very lengthy harangue about how terrible my World of Warcraft novel is, which ends with the phrase, "This book sucks and I'm embarrassed to own it." And I treasure that review because, you know, that's legit. And besides, the reader already owns the book, so I've already got their money. So, you know. But also, you know, I write reviews too. So, and I write negative reviews. So I'm not about to complain when I get a bad one. That happens. You're not going to please everybody. I'm just, you know, that's the business. And I don't complain when I get a bad review. I complain when I get a stupid review. But you know, and there are plenty of reviews that have been nonsensical. But if, you know, somebody's got a legitimate reason for not liking the book, then, you know, hey, that's fair. And I've seen reviews that have really nailed some things I screwed up.
But it's always better to get constructive reviews rather than.
Yeah. A constructive negative review is a far more use than a gushing, unthinking positive one. So.
Yeah. What do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
All of it, and through sheer willpower. There was a movie that came out in 1978 called The Last Waltz, which was about the final concert by the band. They'd been on the road for 16 years, and then in 1976 they decided to call it quits. Although they didn't call it quits for long, 4/5 of them reformed like within 3 years. But in the documentary that Martin Scorsese put together of that final concert and talking to the band, Robbie Robertson, who was the one member of the band who did not join the Reformation, said that we've been on the road for 16 years, 8 years in clubs and bars and dives, 8 years in stadiums and arenas. And his exact phrase was, "It's a goddamn impossible way of life. Writing is a goddamn impossible way of life." And I mean, I love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but it's incredibly difficult. I've when you're freelance, especially doing it as a freelancer, when you're freelance, you're your own boss, and your boss has to be an asshole. You've got to really bear down on yourself and have tremendous amounts of self-discipline, and it's hard. It's much easier to just go sit on the couch and watch Netflix for a day than it is to put your butt in the chair, put your hands on the keyboard, and actually put one word in front of the other. And sometimes the words are terrible. Then again, most of the words are but it's incredibly hard. And it can be disheartening, particularly if there's no projects or all your projects are in different stages where none of them have come out recently, and you're waiting for people. And especially, oh God, one of the worst aspects is that when you have to wait for other people to do stuff, and other people have other things on other commands. But like, I submitted the story, and you're just sitting there waiting, and you can't do anything until the editor gets back to you. Or if you're doing licensed fiction, waiting for the licensor to get back to you, because everything has to be approved by the people who own it. And that's spectacularly frustrating, is just sort of sitting around twiddling your thumbs waiting for other people to act so you can act. Also, the pay sucks.
Yeah, people haven't talked about that very much, but yeah, I've heard that.
And like everything else, prices have gone up, but book advance. In fact, I get paid less per book now than I did 20 years ago. So,
wow.
Yeah,
that's not good.
That's why I do so many other things. I mean, I write for Tor.com. I have my Patreon. I teach martial arts to kids. I'm also I'm a 3rd degree black belt, and I teach. That's something else that got torpedoed by the recent apocalypse. I'm hoping it'll start back up again in the fall. I used to teach a couple after school programs where I would teach karate to kids. Then last February, actually, that stopped, and then stopped completely in March. But I'm hoping to start that up again. But right now I'm still doing like the occasional one-on-one private lesson with people. But I have to find multiple different streams of income in order to survive. So.
Ooh. What has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Ooh. All of it. I mean, the everything is research, and like, there's been all sorts of instances where I'm doing something or seeing something or going somewhere, and it prompts a story, which is wonderful. I mean, I mentioned I've done a cycle of urban fantasy stories set in Key West. That started because I went to Key West in 1993 and completely fell in love with the place, and have been back more than half a dozen times since then. And it always fills me with wonder and joy. And there's all sorts of wonderful stories that I've gotten out of just going there and reading about the place and going to different places and finding out things. There's just, it's a really interesting world out there. And I just, it's fun to explore it and not just explore it physically, but to explore it in terms of story and experiences and stuff.
Okay. What is the greatest lesson you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Deadlines are important. You really need to hit them. Okay. And that's something that really comes out of my time as an editor as much as anything, because it's, the deadlines are there for a reason, and missing them just screws everything up. Um, the one of the things I like about National Novel Writing Month is that it teaches writers the value of discipline and of hitting a goal. It isn't teaching craft. That's not what it's there for. Craft you get other ways. What it does is give you the ability to hit a deadline, which is an important skill. You know, and if you can hone that skill, it teaches professionalism, I think is the best way to describe it. You know, you want people to pay you to write stuff, you got to actually, you know, finish it on a schedule. So.
Mm-hmm. So what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
Oh, lots. One of which is to finish what you start. The ratio of novels that have been started to novels that have been completed is about 8 billion to 0.5. It's really easy to start writing a novel. It's incredibly difficult to finish it. But if you don't finish it, then you haven't written a novel. You haven't written anything. You can't sell half a book or a quarter of a book or 75% of a book. What you sell is a book, which means your story has to actually end. And that's the most difficult part. And you've got to, like I said before, put your butt in the chair, put your fingers on the keyboard, and just keep putting one word in front of the other. They don't have to be good words. That's one of my favorite pieces of advice to give writers is the first draft is allowed to suck. The important thing is to finish it. Once it's finished, you can fix it, you can mold it, you can adjust it, you can rearrange things, you can do it, but you can't really do that properly until it's done. So finish what you start. Don't keep dicking around with the first 3 chapters over and over again to get them perfect, because you're not gonna. And you're not gonna know if it's perfect until you know where the end is. And that's true whether you've outlined it or whether you're doing it by the seat of your pants. Doesn't matter. You have to get to the end before you can then mold it into something better. But don't worry, you know, getting words down is more important than getting the best words down. Like I said, most of them are going to be the anyway. So just get through, get them down, get to the end, then you can make it better.
Great. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you recommend that you'd recommend to other writers that have helped you with your career?
I would recommend any of, depending on what genre you write in, the writers organization for that particular genre is a useful thing to join, especially when you're starting out. You know, whether it's the Romance Writers of America, the Horror Writers of America, Mystery Writers of America, Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, whatever. It's very useful, especially when you're first starting out, to join the organization of whatever genre you're writing in. So if you're going to write science fiction, joining SIFWA is a useful thing. If you're going to write horror, joining HWA is a useful thing, and so on. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I have questions for you about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
My hair looks like this normally. I don't actually do anything to it. Maybe I'll brush it if I'm like feeling really adventurous, but that's about it. I am spectacularly lazy about this sort of thing. So,
okay.
And I'm really lucky that it actually looks okay most of the time. It doesn't look great, but you know.
Okay. What question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would the answer be? I know that's a tough one. Everybody has a problem with it.
No, people have asked me that, but usually it relates to my hair, and I don't want to do that joke twice. I don't know. Nobody ever asked me what my favorite color is, which surprises me. It's red, by the way. But people very rarely ask me that. Actually, and another question nobody ever asked me is, what's your favorite smell?
What is your favorite smell?
The smell of tomato sauce as it's simmering, homemade tomato sauce as it's simmering. I make tomato sauce from scratch. It is one of the things I love. But even if it's not mine, just that particular smell of tomato sauce as it's being made is just the most heavenly smell in the world. And that's partly because I'm Italian, so it's in my DNA. But
I was thinking that.
Yeah. But it's just that is the most wonderful smell in the world. I made a lot of sauce during the pandemic just to have that smell in the house.
Okay. What is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time for your non-writing hobbies and things that you love?
The two things that that I'm most passionate about that don't relate to my writing are baseball and martial arts. And even then, both of those are things I have managed to monetize in some way or other. I occasionally write about baseball, and also I occasionally do some freelance editing work for the Society of American Baseball Research. So that's still something I do professionally. And like I said, I teach karate to kids and adults, and that is something that I also do for money. But having said that, they're not really what I do for a living as such. Making time for it is incredibly difficult. Baseball is relatively easy. I can have a game on while I'm working, so that and I enjoy following along. About 60% of my RSS feed is baseball blogs, so that's just a fun thing. But it's also not something I'm so invested in that, like, if I miss a game, it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, I live and die with the New York Yankees, but I also, if I don't see tonight's game, I'm okay with that, as I can read about the highlights later. Martial arts was something I didn't get into until I turned 35, and the warranty ran out. And my doctor looked at my broken down, overweight, pain-racked body and said, "Hey, maybe you should try once." And considering up to that point, the only thing I exercised was my futility, I thought it might be a good idea to try it. And so I went from an out-of-shape, stamina-free, overweight 35-year-old with constant knee and foot pain to, in 5 years, a first-degree black belt. And now, 17 years later, I'm a third-degree black belt, and might, this or next year, be going for my fourth degree. Might. The pandemic threw everything into chaos, so it's really, it's hard to say, especially since there are aspects of martial arts that we have not been able to do since last March. Sparring is something that, like, we're still training for the first, like, last spring, all the training was done virtually. We did it the same way we're doing this interview, over Zoom. We would all be in our living rooms or our garages or our basements or whatever, and Chuseki Shion-Paul would lead the class. And then starting in the summer, we went to what we still have, which are hybrid classes, where you can either be in person or over Zoom. But we're still not doing close contact stuff like sparring, and we're doing very little stuff where we're too close to each other, and we have to wear masks when we're in the dojo. Regular exercises that we do can be done masked. Fighting is a different thing. There's safety equipment you have to wear. There's a lot more bodily fluids flying around, and you're in much closer quarters. It's still not at the point where we feel comfortable doing that. And that's a major part of a black belt promotion. So I don't know when I'm going to be able to go for it. But in terms of making time for it, I mentioned before about how self-discipline is a very important part of writing, which it is. You have to, because like I said, you're your own boss, so you have to force yourself to do it. And if you don't, no one else is going to make you do it. With one of the reasons why I took up martial arts when I was told at age 35 that maybe I should try exercising is those classes are scheduled. So, so it's like, oh, it's time to go to the dojo. I will go do that now, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't go. If I joined a gym, I would give them my money and never show up. So that helps, is that, it's on a schedule that I can follow. And I love it. I went in there just hoping to get myself into a shape that wasn't round. It's become a passion and become something I absolutely love and adore. And it's made me a teacher, which I love doing. I didn't expect that. Teaching brings me tremendous joy and pride. And I love, I really miss the kids that I worked with in the after school programs. I started that in 2015. And there's a bunch of kids I got to see through, a bunch of different levels and such. And some of them went and joined our dojo. And I really miss that. But yeah, in terms of making time for it, you got to find a way to do that. And it's not always easy. I joke that, of course, writing is very difficult. If it was easy, everybody would do it. There's a lot of juggling going on, and sometimes something falls by the wayside. I've finally found the value of the to-do list, thanks in particular to a dear friend who basically hit me over the head repeatedly until I started doing one. But it's, you know, you got to make the time. The time isn't just going to magically materialize. You've got to carve it out.
Right. Okay. What does your writing space look like?
Wherever I happen to be sitting at the time. Mostly I work in my office at home. My wife and I live in a duplex apartment that's in a house. It's the second and third floor of a house. And there's 3 bedrooms upstairs, one of which is our bedroom, one of which was our roommate's. He just moved out recently. So we're going to actually turn it into a craft room and a guest room for my wife, who is a costumer. And the other bedroom is our joint office. And we each have a desk set up with a desktop computer on it. I'm in a nice comfy chair with my back to the wall and looking out over the room. I can see the TV on the right-hand side, so if I want to have a baseball game on while I'm working, I can see it. And I've got, you know, little animals and action figures and other stuff dotting the desk. And it's very comfortable for me. Having said that, I could pretty much write anywhere. I can bring my laptop.
Okay.
I trained myself to do that fairly early on. In 2006, I had a StarCraft novel published based on the video game. And I wrote that book in 3 different countries. I wrote some of it in Glasgow, Scotland. I wrote some of it in Dublin, Ireland. I wrote some of it in Grange-con Rocks, Ireland. I wrote some of it here in New York. I wrote some of it in Atlanta, Georgia. And I wrote some of it on planes, trains, and trains that took me from one of those locations to one of those other locations. Although about the biggest chunk of it was written in a pub in Dublin, which I dedicated the book to. But this was a trip that my then girlfriend and I had already planned when this deadline came up. And I had to write the book. I couldn't, you know, take that vacation off. So I had to devote a certain amount of time every day on this vacation working on this book. So yeah, I can write anywhere. I can bring my laptop.
So do you prefer, you were just saying you could watch a game while you were working. So do you prefer having music or some kind of noise?
Music, usually. Music. I almost always have music going, and regardless of what I'm doing. So yeah, I have a writing playlist that's music I write particularly well to, which is a lot of classic rock mostly. But just music I like is usually playing when I'm working.
Okay, so you don't like silence.
I'm sorry?
You don't like silence.
No, I hate silence. God, no, silence is horrible. I'm Italian. We like noise. I usually I can't have, like, a baseball game is not something I have to pay attention to every nanosecond. So I can't really have something with a story happening on TV, but a ball game is fine.
Mm-hmm. And you write with your hands too.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to say that.
And I talk with my hands.
Yeah.
No, when I was in high school, my friends were scared to death of me learning how to drive because they were worried I would talk while I was driving and crash the car. So yeah.
I had to say that. Sorry.
That's okay.
You were talking with your hands.
Yes.
So when you're writing, do you need to have some certain type of food or drink or anything like that with you?
Nothing specific. In the morning, I'm usually drinking coffee because I'm an addict. By the time the afternoon rolls around, I've switched to herbal iced tea just because that's what I like drinking and it's easy to have around. I don't usually involve alcohol in the process. I know some writers swear by it. I don't usually. I save that for when I'm either having dinner or going to a party or something. But I know plenty of writers who swear by it, who don't write without like a bourbon handy or something, which is good. Yeah. And that's the thing. You were asking for advice before, and there's one other piece of advice that I think is important, is you have to find a writing space that is comfortable for you. There is no one right way to do it. There is the right way for you to do it, and you got to find it. And that may be, at your dining room table. It may be in your bedroom. It may be in your office space. It may be at the local Starbucks. It may be at a laptop. It may be on an iPad. It may be on a yellow legal pad with a pen. But, and it might be with water, and it might be with bourbon. And it might be with Oreo cookies. Whatever works for you. Just make sure the cookie crumbs don't get in the keyboard. So, that's finding your bliss, as it were, is important. But yeah, I usually like to have something to drink handy. If for no other reason, sometimes if I'm really writing intensely, my mouth will start hanging open and then my throat dries up. So.
Okay. The writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them with their writing.
Right.
Do you have them, or do they help or hinder you?
Oh, they don't help in the least. But we got two black cats, Kaylee and Louie. And actually, if you support my Patreon, you can see pictures of them, because one of the tiers is getting you cat pictures. So they are Kaylee and Louie are very friendly and very photogenic and very people oriented. They're always like around when people come visit, which of course hasn't happened much lately. But they're incredibly sweet cats, and I love having them around. So yeah, yes, I have the obligatory writer's cats. We had a dog for a while. We haven't. He was a golden retriever named Scooter, who lived to be 12, which is, when did he die? 2015. He lived to be 15. Yeah, and he was a good old boy. And he was a great dog. We haven't really been able to bring ourselves to get a new one since.
Yeah. Does your cat often walk across your keyboard and write for you?
Only when she's hungry. Louie doesn't do that. Kaylee does. Kaylee every once in a while will walk across. That means it's like, Dad, you haven't fed me in far too long. Will you get up off the computer and please give me food?
Yeah, mine does that too. Yeah. Okay, I just have two more questions for you.
Okay.
One is, where can people find your work, aside from Andy's Bookstop of Worcester? They should totally check here first. And
yes.
I'm going to...
yes, but not everybody is in Worcester.
Well, so. That's the thing. Even though you're not in Worcester, you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And we can order your books, any ones that are available. You can order any of Keith's books, and you can call us at 508-796-5613, and we can get your books.
Basically, any legitimate book dealer will have my books.
Yes.
In ebook form, if not necessarily print form. So a lot of my older books in particular are no longer available as print books, but most of them are available as ebooks. Certainly all the Star Trek stuff is. Like I said, Simon & Schuster has been very good about ebooks. And I think with like 2 exceptions, every single Star Trek book they've published is available as an ebook. Wow. A couple of the older ones aren't, just because they don't have electronic versions of them, because they predate the computer revolution. But,
what Star Trek predates computers?
Well, yes, some Star Trek writers at least predated computers, but most of them are, like I said, are available. Certainly all of mine are, and a bunch of my others are. But whether it's Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Kobo or Apple Books or Google Play, whatever, and a lot of bookstores have it, and also a great resource if you want to support independent bookstores like Annie's Bookstop. There's IndieBound, which will help you find stuff at independent bookstores in and around your area. But yeah, I mean, my stuff is available through all those places. Currently, like I said, the most recent books, there's To Hell and Regroup with David Sherman. There's Animal with Dr. Manish K. Batra and myself. There's the All the Way House, which is part of the Systema Paradoxa series. There's all the Precinct books: Dragon Precinct, Unicorn Precinct, Goblin Precinct, Griffin Precinct, Mermaid Precinct, and Tales from Dragon Precinct, with Phoenix Precinct on the way. There's A Furnace Sealed, part of the Bram Gold Adventures. There's Ragnarok and Roll, which is the first of the Tales of Cassie Zukov, Weirdness Magnet. The Super City Cops novellas are available. There's 3 of them: Avenging Amethyst, Secret Identities, and Undercover Blues. And I'm under contract to do 4 more novellas with Falstaff Books. I got to get on those at some point. And a bunch of anthologies that are currently out that I have stories in. There's Badass Moms from Crazy 8 Press. Across the Universe, Tales of Alternative Beatles from Fantastic Books. Release the Virgins, which is also from Fantastic Books. Footprints in the Stars from E-Spec. Thrilling Adventure Yarns from Crazy 8. Probably some, and I can't believe I forgot this one. The International Association of Media Tie-in Writers recently released a charity anthology which benefits the World Literacy Foundation. It's called Turning the Tide, Tide spelled T-I-E-D. And a whole bunch of people who like me, write a lot of licensed fiction. People like Greg Cox, Max Allan Collins, Aaron Rosenberg, Marshalia Rockwell, Jeff Marriott, Jonathan Mayberry, Robert Greenberger, Derek Tyler Attico, Kelly Fitzpatrick, Yvonne Navarro, Nancy Holder, a bunch of others. We all did stories of characters who were in the public domain. So you got, Sherlock Holmes, Frankenstein's monster, the various Jules Verne and H.G. Wells characters, Alan Quatermain. I did one featuring Aisha, who is the title character in H. Rider Haggard's She, and a bunch of others. It's a wonderful anthology, and it benefits a good cause.
Wonderful. That sounds great. And my last question to you is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Best bet is to go to DeCandido.net. It's DeCandido there.net. It is a terrible website. It looks like it was designed by somebody who learned HTML in 1996. That's because I learned HTML in 1996. But it serves its purpose as a link dump. I'm in the process of getting it upgraded to something that actually comes from the 21st century. That's been a slow process for a variety of reasons, many of which unfortunately are pandemic related. But I'm hoping it'll finally get done this year. But for the now, at least, it'll take you to all the places that look better. I have a blog on WordPress, which I update very regularly. I post regularly on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And there are links to that there. DeCandido.net also has links to ordering my most recent books from various online book dealers. There's links to my Wikipedia page, to my YouTube channel, to my Patreon, which you should definitely all support because it's awesome, and to my YouTube channel where I'm reading my short stories, and also to my work at Tor.com.
Could you tell us? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What were you going to say? No,
could you tell us a little bit more about your Patreon?
Oh yeah. There are various tiers that start as low as $1 and go as high as $20. And if you do the full $20, you get a monthly movie review. I'm almost done. A monthly movie review, anywhere between 1 and 5 TV reviews per month, regular cat pictures, and weekly short excerpts from my work in progress. A monthly vignette featuring one of my original characters from the Precinct books or the Cassie stories or the Brom Gold books or the Super City Cops books. And also first looks. This is the $20 tier. You get a first look at my first drafts of my chapters or short stories as soon as they're done.
Is that $20 a month or just $20
yes,
period?
$20 a month. $20 a month. Yeah. Okay. If you just want the movie reviews, it's $1 a month. And then as you go higher, something gets added, but you get all the stuff from the lower tiers too. So.
Okay, great. Well, that's all I have for you. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Nope, I think we covered everything.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Keith. And I hope you do come to Annie's when this pandemic is over. It would be great to have you come. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll be seeing you. Bye.